Not correct. It does have Public Works Overview. It is scheduled as what's called a Ready Access program or project, which means we provide all of the funding for the project in one budget act. We give them 2 years to expend it to help them move the project as fast as they can. They are required to follow all of the Public Works Board oversight, but they are not allowed to make any scope changes or augmentations to the project.
Okay. All right. No other questions? Should we do them all 1 through 13 en masse? Okay. Why don't we accept all of items 1 through 13? Vote only.
Lou?
Aye.
Huff?
Aye.
Okay. We'll leave the roll open to see whether or not Senator Wright would like to add on. So let's turn to item 14, University of California redistricting data at UC Berkeley. Discussion item. Okay. What's going on?
Well, that's an excellent question, Madam Chair. Since I was just recently made aware that there was going to be a request.
Okay.
The budget called for $150,000 in the current year for the Institute for Government Studies at Berkeley to do some of this same work. It is truly unclear to me, given what is being requested here, the magnitude of the funding that's being proposed, and also whether or not this is an augmentation to the UC budget or a proposed redirection of existing funds within the UC budget. So some clarification would be helpful.
Okay. It'll redirect. Do you want to have, Ms. Elio has any comments?
We, too, have just seen this as of yesterday afternoon, and we wouldn't have a lot to add other than it is unclear whether this would be an augmentation or a redirection and the specific purposes this would be used for, since there is money in the current year budget provided for this purpose. The purpose, evidently, is Prop 11, when it was passed, requires that the legislature make available certain kinds of mapping resources for the redistricting commission, and this institute for a number of years now has provided this kind of demographic information. So again, the augmentation is just unclear in terms of what it would provide.
Understanding that this is a recommendation for a redirection, not an augmentation.
Well, again, Madam Chair, we would have concerns. I have just not had an opportunity to talk to the Institute to fully understand what's being requested here, what this comprises. So,
all right. Well, yes, Senator Howe.
If UC Berkeley has done this in the past, how has it been funded in the past?
My recollection is that there had been an augmentation when this was done years ago, but as I noted last year, it was a redirection of 100. Well, it was the university took an overall dollar cut to its budget. The cut was reduced by $150,000 for purposes of funding this. So essentially, it was just a redirection out of the university's budget to provide $150,000 to the institute.
Considering that the governor's May revision is very generous to the UCs, perhaps that can also be accommodated within those dollar amounts.
Well, again, we can. In this climate, I would agree with you, and we appreciate the governor's support for the university's budget. I just need clarity about, for instance, the $240,000 in general fund for UC employees overseeing the database. I don't know if that's to hire more employees. I don't know if it's additional resources for compensation issues. It's not clear to me what this is requesting.
So, leave the item open for this to come up again next week.
We can do that.
Okay, why don't we, give you some time, because next week we'll have a full budget hearing and we'll have this topic again on the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that.
Okay. Let's do item 15, the Solar Training Collaborative Program.
This is here just because it's a new program, just to get some clarity on what they're doing.
Okay. Okay. Community colleges want to speak to the program, or?
Sure. This is a new initiative funded with federal dollars through the U.S. Department of Energy, and essentially it will establish a curriculum and a certification program for solar training providers, installers, really. And the funds are, there's an allocation of funds in the current year, and what's in your agenda is the budget year portion of the funds. So it's a new grant coming down from the federal government, and it's a good opportunity for the colleges to work along K-12, along with K-12, with high schools, ROPs, adult schools, to develop this curriculum. And then once it's available, it will be used in, our estimate is in at least 130 different programs at high school level and community college level. So it's essentially developing the curriculum that these programs can use. It's our estimate that over 65,000 students will be exposed, will be trained using this curriculum over time.
Correct. Now, who is putting this curriculum together?
It will be a collaborative effort, and so the funds will. It will be a collaborative effort with the community colleges, along with trade representatives. They're a key component in this initiative, including the California Energy Commission, the National Electric Contractors Association, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and the California Centers for Sustainable Energy. So these are partners in competing for these federal funds.
Okay. Staff recommends approval. Okay. We'll take a vote on that.
Lou?
Aye.
Huff?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Item 16, CSAC and Ed Fund detangling. Are you okay with this?
No problem with second 4 and 5.
Okay. Okay, would someone like to explain what this is? LAO? Oh, I don't care. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. Ian Johnson, Department of Finance. This item is for essentially the detangling of the Student Aid Commission from Ed Fund. The agenda notes here do a good job of laying out the basic premise of the proposal. As you all know, and as I've testified prior, final bids were recently received for the purchase of Ed Fund by an outside entity, and the sale will hopefully close soon. Upon this sale, the Student Aid Commission will assume responsibility for various services currently provided by Ed Fund, i.e. printing, mail, and some IT functions. Our analysis in collaboration with Ed Fund and the OCIO found $1.2 million and 9 positions to be essential and reasonable for the Student Aid Commission to continue these shared services. As a technical side note, the Student Aid Commission currently has $550,000 of unspent reappropriation authority from prior budget cycles for this very purpose. Thus, the net general fund augmentation needed is only $676,000. If you'd like, I can walk you through the highlights of what we approved for this proposal.
Well, that's okay. I think, Senator Huff, you have a question about staff's recommendations?
Yeah, I actually like the governor's language better. That's the only part here. So, it's a little broad in that it says leave sufficient funds. How much is sufficient? But
I think the reason why staff included this language was to have some more oversight over these funds.
Yeah, well, I can appreciate that, and I'm not a hard no, but I'm a no. It's not an immovable no.
Okay, all right. Any other comment on LAO?
Yes, Madam Chair. Judy Hyman from the Legislative Analyst. As you may know, the Commission requested close to $5 million and 23 positions. Finance's recommendation is much smaller. A number of the items that the Commission requested are indeed pressing needs of the Commission, but not directly related to this transition, and we think Finance did a pretty good job of teasing those out. There are a few items, however, that we have some concerns about, particularly in mission-critical areas like information technology. The Commission staff at present is stretched very thin, as are most state agencies, and because of this, we feel it's particularly important to ensure that in taking on new responsibilities, as they will have to do once Ed Fund is sold, that we ensure that they have the staffing and resources necessary to make sure that there are no major problems that could stall the state's entire financial aid program. So we have not had an opportunity to complete our analysis. We have a few questions out on a couple of items, not amounting to a big difference from what finance is suggesting, but potentially there might be a couple of more items we would recommend you consider.
Would you be ready by next week?
Yes, we would certainly be happy to bring you a more thorough assessment by next
Thursday.
next Monday or Thursday.
Monday.
Monday would be fine, certainly.
If I could just comment, the Department of Finance's approval amount for this issue does include 15% for just contingency for any unforeseen expenses that may occur. It is possible as well that the Student Aid Commission may need to do some reclassification of a couple of the positions, and they have full authority to do so.
Okay, appreciate that.
Defer a vote until Monday?
Yeah, I'm happy to defer a vote till Monday. So, okay, we'll hold this till over.
Thanks. We'd appreciate the opportunity to bring that to you.
Okay, and then the last item, item 17, student loan operating fund swap. Finance?
This item would essentially shift $75 million from the student loan operating fund to the general fund to offset Cal grants. While the administration is very interested in offsetting all of the general fund that's possible, we can't support taking more than $75 million, as the staff comments here recommend. This is essentially a cash and a timing issue. There are many puts and calls on the student loan operating fund. There are payments required and reimbursements that come in from the federal government, which are somewhat irregular on a month-to-month basis. I would just remind you that the risk here is that Ed Fund is not able to make their federal payments while administering the program for the remainder of their federal fiscal year. This could result in essence, if Ed Fund is not able to make their federal payment obligation, the risk here is that the Student Aid Commission could lose and be stripped by the U.S. Department of Education their guarantor designation, which, as you all probably know, would mean California losing any value in its asset, Ed Fund. So that's the risk here. So we would recommend $75 million as opposed to the $100 in the staff comments.
And how much is in the student fund, loan fund?
Most recent projections are that by the end of the federal fiscal year, there will be $119 million, $5 million of which is for our fixed assets. So you're looking at cash of $114 million, and of course our normal operations, and again, many puts and calls that go into that fund. So the Department of Finance would just caution you that, as we referred to it, if a perfect storm were to hit as far as cash timing goes on the student loan operating fund, the consequences would be not good.
Okay. LAO?
And we agree that it's important to maintain a prudent reserve in the student loan operating fund because the cash balance can vary tremendously from day to day. However, taking that into consideration, we've used a cash flow projection that was prepared by Ed Fund with their best assessment of when these puts and calls would hit, and maintained a $40 million reserve in addition to $24 million that's in an equity account that could also be used. So we've maintained a cushion there of over $60 million, and within those parameters still feel like you could get $100 million to use for student aid.
Yes.
Good morning. Janet McDuffie with the California Student Aid Commission. We also have some concerns on raising the amount taken from the Student Loan Operating Fund up to the $100 million. As Department of Finance has expressed, there are interplays between what is called the federal fund and the Student Loan Operating Fund in terms of the cash balances, and we have obligations to both funds. If the fund or if the assets are sold by the end of September, as long as there is sufficient language to make sure that we can meet all the obligations that we may have in those funds, we may be able to meet the $100 million. If the assets are not sold, we have a continuing obligation to the loan program, and it may be too much of a draw to continue our obligations. We need some more time to kind of analyze that if for any reason the sale does not go through.
Okay, LAO, do you have a comment or reply to that?
No, just to add that timing is indeed an issue. So you couldn't take $100 million on July 1st, and the timing of the sale will have an impact on how much you can take. However, once the assets are sold, then the balance of the Student Loan Operating Fund should be used for financial aid purposes and should be able to make up whatever you haven't taken so far of what we think is still about $100 million.
What would your pleasure?
Go with the $100 million.
Okay. Senator Wright?
The LAO, you think we can do that and manage that?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, the recommendation is for the subcommittee to swap the $100 million general fund from CSAC budget with SLOF funds for the additional $25 million, totaling $100 million. Okay, it's a motion.
Lou?
Aye.
Huff?
Aye.
Wright?
Aye.
Thank you.
Go back and take Senator Huff.
Yes,
Wright's vote.
Senator Wright, would you like to add on to some of the vote-only items, 1 through 13?
We voted on 1 through 13 as a block.
As a
The
block?
votes were Lou, yes. Huff, yes.
Okay.
Items on the vote-only calendar, items 1 through 13. Wright?
Aye.
Okay. And then item 15.
14.
Oh, sorry. Item 14, I think we held open.
We held over, just for his information.
Oh, yeah. Item 14 was held open. And item 15, the Community Colleges Solar Training Collaborative Program. Votes were Lou, yes. Huff, yes. Wright?
Aye.
Okay, and I think, did he do item 16?
Item 16 was held open.
Okay.
And that concludes the
All right, and item
presentation.
17, that's it. Okay, let's turn to Agenda B, which is Department of Education. And the first item is the Department of Finance budget letters. So how many items do we have on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Okay. Item 1, it concerns itself with technical adjustments for the budget update.
Yes.
And any questions on any of these items? Number 1. Would somebody like to talk about number 1?
Oh, you mean item
Item 1.
finance, probably.
Finance, yes. One-time carryover for the Casey.
Yes, Brian Storm with the Department of Finance. What this adjustment would do is it would reappropriate $1,050,000 that had been appropriated a couple years back through a bill that would have required a board to get together and determine if there was an alternative way of making sure that kids were not being adversely impacted by the Casey. And basically the way that this has worked is that the department has done some legwork on this. But because of the timing of the bill, where a lot of the activities would come after the final adoption of a recommendation by the state board, that's where the lion's share of the work would occur. Now, the board, I believe, has not taken any action on it yet, and so the idea is that you would reappropriate this money for the coming fiscal year if there are to be any work products to be done during that time.
All right.
Yeah, I'm just going to oppose it. I opposed it before, so just to be consistent.
Okay, all right. And do you have a schedule as to when this might appear before the board?
Roxanne Harris with the Department of Education. My understanding is that the panel has presented recommendations. They're just waiting for the board to take some action. And my understanding is it should be coming before the board within the next few months, maybe.
Next few months? Okay. Okay, any other questions on any other items? 2, 3,
I'm good with the rest. Up to 11.
4, special ed. 5, 6, there's a group of them with the child nutrition. 6, 7, 8. reapportionment in mental health services. 9, King City Joint Union High School. Any questions?
If we could just pull item 1 out of consent and then do the rest of the block.
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. Let's do items 2 through 10.
Actually, 11.
11. Okay, 2 through 11.
Okay.
For approval.
Senator Liu?
Aye.
Senator Huff?
Aye.
Senator Wright?
Aye.
Okay, let's hold, then go back to item 1 for the vote.
Senator Liu?
Aye.
Senator Huff?
No.
Senator Wright?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Let's then turn to item 2, the juvenile court school funding. Members, that's page 6 in your packet. Okay, LAO wants to start?
Sure. Good morning, Jim Soland, Legislative Analyst Office. So I'll just provide a really quick overview of some of the pertinent issues relative to Division of Juvenile Justice or juvenile court school funding and their relation to each other. So, as you know, youthful offenders can be served by both counties and the state in California. For county court schools, they'd primarily be serving students that are in juvenile homes, ranches, or camps, and they tend to be sort of lower-level nonviolent offenders who are either awaiting a hearing or in for some sort of minor drug-related offense, something along those lines. By comparison, there's the Division of Juvenile Justice, or California Youth Authority, CYA, which is the state level system for offenders who have committed sort of higher level crimes, youth who are serving violent offenses and the like. There are a couple of historical items to keep in mind here when you consider the relative funding landscape for the different segments that would be serving youthful offenders. The first is that there was a settlement in 2004 from the Farrell lawsuit that drastically increased the costs of the state-level system. And it really had pretty huge implications for how youth are educated at the Division of Juvenile Justice. For example, it mandated particular student-to-teacher ratios, 12-to-1 for general education, 10-to-1 for certain special classes, and then 5-to-1 in some additional cases where the students are on some sort of restricted setting or they need a specialist of some kind. These are the big drivers now of the CYA's costs, and they're inflexible given that they're part of the settlement. Moving along to sort of the second big historical piece, there was also a bill, Senate Bill 81, passed in 2007, that was essentially designed to reduce the state's reliance on the state-level system, the Division of Juvenile Justice. The move was made partially due to the costs, but also just due to the sense that on many levels the state system was deeply flawed. The way this was achieved, and it's important to bear in mind as you sort of think about the relative budgets, is that it primarily achieved it by limiting sentencing authority. So in the past, a judge would be able to take a nonviolent offender and say, based on your track record, we want to send you to the state-level system for the higher-level offenders. The bill took away that discretion. So when you're talking about a potential realignment, it's not students being shifted from one system to the other. It's students who, at a judge's discretion, might have been sentenced to the state-level system that now would be required to be held back in the court school system. So moving along to just what we're seeing in terms of, and just one more item, sorry, on the on the realignment is that to support the realignment, the state provided a significant amount of funding to support any sort of shift in students that you might see. There is a youthful offender block grant that was created that's going to provide about a total of $93 million in the current year, specifically to address any costs that might result from from Senate Bill 81 in 2007. So just jumping ahead a little bit, in terms of the relative funding that's provided to the state level system versus the county level system, you'll see on page 6 of the agenda, and I'll just refer you to the agenda for the data here, but on page 6 in the table at the bottom, you'll see that per pupil funding is at about $21,000, and Prop 98 funding per student. It's obviously very high, and as you'll see just looking at the historical trends, back before the settlement it was down around $10,000 per student. So really a lot of the costs here, if not all of the cost changes, are being driven by these mandated student-teacher ratios.
And that's for DJJ?
That's for DJJ.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. By comparison, well, and I guess one more thing to add here is that when you're looking at these figures, the way that these rates are determined is via formula. And the basis for the formula is that you take essentially the salary of a teacher that would be in the county system teaching for a court school and then adjust it for the staffing ratios and the differences in the length of school day. So really the county system is the foundation for the pricing for the DJJ system and the Farrell settlement. Looking at the funding for juvenile court schools by comparison, which is on page 8, you'll see that in terms of just the revenue limit portion of the funding that might be received at the county level, that's about $8,500 in the current year. It has been subject to some of the adjustments that have been made to the county revenue limits, of which it's a part. So, no COLA factored in and certain baseline cuts. But in addition to that, there are some funds that you would be receiving potentially at the county court school level that DJJ wouldn't be receiving. For example, there are categoricals that juvenile court school would potentially have access to. And those are broken out a little bit on page 10 of the agenda. We essentially did a very just ballpark estimate of not the exact amount of funds that the court schools would be receiving, but just an estimate of what might be going to the counties that they could use on a per pupil basis for those kids. And we estimate that when you figure in things like special education, like your basic categorical funds, like regional occupation centers, you're looking at around $6,000 per student in 2008-9. And in addition, if you were to direct your youthful offender block grant dollars to the court schools, that would be about an additional $853, or about $1,000 in the current year. Now, that's not saying all of that money would go towards the kids, and in most cases there are other needs that the counties are likely addressing, but that money is available to them should they want to mitigate any of the shifting that's occurring. So in terms of just a basic takeaway, when you look at the relative funding, you're talking about about $20,000 for the state level system, and potentially in the ballpark of $15,000 for the county level system. And when you account for the class size differences, the salaries that are meant to be the same for the teachers on a daily basis, and the fact that some youth will be redirected, but in most cases they're still not the most violent of the violent, the ones who would have been mandatorily sent to the Division of Juvenile Justice anyway. It definitely seems like the dollar amounts are at least in the same ballpark. So I'll just conclude there and open it up to any questions if there are any.
Okay, fine. Any questions from members? Yes, Senator Wright.
The concern I have, you indicated that the offender is a lower level at the county. That's not true. Where did the kid who ended up in the state come from?
Well, I'm not sure I'm following the question exactly. But
before you got to the state, where did you originate?
Right. Oftentimes they...
Not oftentimes. Where did you originate?
There are certainly cases where they would...
No. Where did you start? You had to start in the county, right? You don't get arrested and go to the state. You start in the county, right?
Certainly, yes. While you're
you're good. Yes. Stop right there. You're doing good. So as a practical matter, all the kids who end up in the state system had to come through the county system, right?
Well, it's
you said yes before, so the answer again would be yes.
I said yes without the chance to give the the caveat, which is that certainly they would have been in the county system while they were awaiting their hearing.
Right.
So yes, they've been in the county system at one point or another.
So let me try this again. Every one of the kids who ends up in the state system had to come through the county system. And they may have been there for varying lengths of time, depending upon how long the trial took. So effectively, it's the same kid. Now, for those kids who are sentenced to county time, you would be right. But in order for you to get to DJJ, you had to come through the county. So oftentimes, it's the same kid with the same issues that he brought with him from the county. So how do you then make a distinction between the service needs of the child who's going to DJJ and say that because he was sentenced, now we give him extra service, but while he's in the county system, we don't recognize the same needs that he had before? He didn't acquire the needs when he got to DJJ. He had them before, right?
Right. And I mean, you certainly are talking about a portion of the students who would be served at the county level. But again, it is only a portion. I mean, when you're talking about kids who have been sentenced and, they're actually providing the services at that point, it's really becomes the state's.
Right. So the argument that you would make would be that DJJ has a higher concentration of more at-risk youth, but not that the county wouldn't have a share, because all of the kids had to start at the. You don't get arrested and go to trial from the state.
Right, and part of what I was discussing, too, had more to do with the actual realignment. It was just to suggest that in terms of the impact of realigning where we're sending some of the youthful offenders, it's not a matter of just taking the kids who were violent offenders and, would have gone to DJJ and just sending them back to the county. It's sort of the reverse. It's a student who student who would have, committed sort of a lower level offense compared to many of the students who are being served at the state level, where the judge might have previously been able to say, we're going to send you to the state level anyway. That discretion has been taken away.
The concern I have, if in fact we don't have the cash, then, poverty creates its own set of issues. I'm clear. I think that to simply say, I think we would be susceptible to the same lawsuit at the county level, because the students who were there have the same issues for which you were sued in Farrell. It's just that you didn't get sued at the county, you only got sued at the state. But it's the same kid who has the same needs. The ratio may not be the same, and you might conclude that you can pay them slightly less. But I think that it would be false to say that you don't have the same kid. Moreover, you indicated that there's an appropriation made to the county. The problem is that appropriation to the county has to be used for housing the more violent kid that the county used to not have to deal with. It's not the option of the superintendent of the schools to prevail on the Board of Supervisors to say, give me the housing money and let me use it in the school. They don't have access to that revenue.
I'm not sure exactly which revenue.
We don't take money out of the Department of Rehabilitation and include it in Prop 9 because we think it would be a good idea. The guy who's running the county school system doesn't have access to the money that you gave to the county for housing the kids. He can't take that money and move it over to the education side. That's not an option that he has. So for you to suggest that they could, they could. I mean, and pigs could fly one day, but it ain't going to happen. So I'm saying that that's not fair either. They operate on the same Prop 98 money that's allocated. Arguably, you could say that their percentage of those students might be 10%, and you should make some pro rata adjustment for the number of those youth that they have. But I think to simply say they don't have any is just a misrepresentation of the fact.
If we're talking about youthful offender block grant, then my understanding of the money is that it was flexible enough and given with the specific intent to mitigate some of the transition that you're discussing.
But it doesn't go to education. It goes to housing the young people.
It could go to education.
It could go to traffic guards on Crenshaw too, but that ain't what they're going to spend it for. The problem is that when you transferred that responsibility, you also transferred a higher group of kids who also bring needs, and you're discounting the cost of housing that group of offenders. So the probation department in L.A. County takes that money and uses it to house the kids, for which if they're not careful, they'll get sued and there'll be another lawsuit as to how they house the young people, for which, by the way, they were beat up a few years ago. We just rebuilt the juvenile hall in L.A. I remember that because I did the bill that did it. And we had to do that because we were being sued because the manner in which we were housing the people, not educating them, but housing them wasn't sufficient. So I'm just saying, it's not like they have the option of taking that cash and moving it back. I mean, again, if everyone has to suffer, then I think you crunch it down and say, I mean, it may not be that it equalizes, because I would agree with you here that the percentage of hardcore kids at DJJ as a percentage is greater than the percentage at the county. What's the ratio? Damned if I know. But I would concede your point to a degree. I would say then that there should be an adjustment relative to the fund allocation that probably would shift some of the money from DJJ back to the county to recognize the same at-risk hardcore youth that they house.
The only, and not to necessarily disagree, but I just think that the factor to bear in mind is just that given that the funding is, and for all intents and purposes, following the student, so you have the revenue limit that would be generated by the student going into the county system. You have categorical funds that could potentially support them. And then you look at the differences in the relative class sizes in terms of what you're getting on a pupil-by-pupil basis. It's just not entirely clear from our perspective that that something other than the class size would be the biggest factor in terms of what that student would receive from an educational perspective.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Okay. Senator Huff?
I think Senator Wright makes a lot of good points, but there are some other issues.
There was always a but.
Well, I mean, it's not like they're operating in a vacuum. They have control over some of their cost drivers in the court schools, including their class size. That doesn't fall under the same type of court order that DJJ is bound by. Is that correct?
No, the limits on class size for juvenile court schools are the same as they would be in the normal K-12 program in the state. There are cases where
They're shaking heads behind you.
well, I think where there might be some disagreement is locally, if the parole officers determine that a class is too large to maintain safety, then they certainly they have the discretion to limit class sizes. And oftentimes you will see a class size limited to more like something like 17 to 1 or 15 to 1 in some cases in the court schools. But again, that is a locally driven decision, and there's nothing that I'm aware of anyway in the law that would require them to.
Yeah, my mother used to teach in a court school. May her soul rest in peace. A lot of times she had a lot of the students that weren't in the classroom just because of their behavioral problems, and she had the option to send them into lockup. Do we know what percentage are actually in classroom situation versus lockup at any given time? Is there like a ratio?
Unfortunately, I don't have that data at my fingertips, but I can talk to our criminal justice folks and get the number.
That does impact things.
Sure.
And do we know how our administrators are in compared to in LA, particularly compared to other court schools?
You mean in terms of the ratios?
Yeah.
Or? I don't have exact data on that. I think, again, it's a local decision. In some cases, you would certainly see situations where the administrative to teacher ratio is much higher than in other places, as compared to Division of Juvenile Justice, where it's all worked out in the plan.
Okay, I think in my notes here, I was saying it's about twice the level in comparison to court schools. Yeah, a lot of administrators in LA. And I'm not sure, maybe that's all justified, but it's certainly something we ought to be looking at in this mix. That's it for my...
Okay, there is on page 12 an action item.
And the rec goes on page 16.
And, I'm sorry?
The recommendation is on page 16.
Okay, and the recommendation is on page 16. To adopt the DOF April letter request for extended expenditure authority for $1.7 million in one-time federal Title III funds for an additional year in order to complete the technical assistance to DJJ in the court schools.
I move that action, Madam Chair.
Okay, is there any comment? No. Okay, call the roll.
Senator Liu?
Aye.
Senator Huff?
Aye.
Senator Wright?
Okay, I just want to go back to LACO because it's been brought to our attention that they are facing some budget difficulties, and according to the staff report, that there are a group of issues that are of concern to all of us about what's going on with LACO, and I know that there are people from LACO here in the audience, and that there are some recommendations also for consideration that probably won't happen until next Thursday.
I think there are people here from the county court school.
Right.
Will we get to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get there. Right. And but I think some of the issues that, as I was reading this, there's lots of inconsistencies, lots of things that we could do to clean up this mess regarding funding and how some schools earn more in terms of, aside from court schools, there are other kinds of programs that we have in the state that everybody has a different amount of dollars, and everybody does sort of similar functions. I mean, I don't know whether or not there's we can't go through and straighten that out here today, but whether or not there's a need for us to take a look at this and try to resolve some of the issues here. And then also with some of these county schools, what happens when, because the state is responsible for any of these kids up to age 25. So is there a higher education component to this? And where do they have opportunities to go to community college? I mean, I don't understand exactly what goes on, and maybe somebody can help me out here. And so what are some other kinds of issues that we need to look at aside from variations of funding? I know you guys have, the LAO has done some studies in this respect, and I'd like to eventually, as we continue this conversation, maybe have some clarification about how we can improve the system. It won't happen in this budget year, but maybe we can have some more public hearings about what goes on and make some decisions about how we can smooth this all out. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is David Murphy. I'm the new superintendent of education for DJJ. I've been there a long time, since September, so I certainly know the whole state process. I'm here just to answer any technical questions that I can regarding DJJ education programs. I apologize that my chief financial officer is with a flat tire on J Street in a no parking zone and trying to figure out how he can flag a taxi but not get towed. So I don't have his financial information, but I can answer some questions for you. You did ask a question regarding the education program for youth up to age 25. I could answer that for you if you wish.
Okay, please. I'd be interested.
Sure. We have two goals in DJJ, the academic goal and the job preparation and training goal. The job preparation and training goal is primarily for youth who have diplomas, have earned a diploma. Our belief is that a diploma is the goal, not a GED. Then once they have a diploma, or if they do have a GED and elect, they can participate fully in our career technical education programs, a large subset of which is vocational programs. So those programs are there through the time the youth are released.
Do you run those programs yourself? Or
yes, we do.
Rather than having them attend community colleges?
We actually have a community college component. We had an expensive one and a less expensive one. We now have the less expensive one. That is in most of the Coastline Community College district is the one that we use. But we primarily staff and train our own youth, and where we can, we integrate that with work that needs to be done at the facility.
Okay. Thank you. Can you clarify the difference between the population between DJJ and the county schools?
I can really only speak about the DJJ population. I noticed that there was fairly oblique common nouns used. I can name the 4 categories of offenses that come to us, if you wish.
Sure.
Murderers, those who have attempted murder once or twice, those who have raped, perhaps more than once, and those who have committed armed robberies, perhaps more than once, usually more than once, but I can't say for sure. Those are the 4 categories that comprise our population.
And your population has been diminishing.
Yes, for 2 reasons. One was already cited. Those who are lesser offenders have been moved to the counties, and I'm not, I think others are more expert at saying what kind of funding went with them to do that. Not only has our population been diminished because of that and because of the sentencing, but also, well, that's it. We have, I would tell you, closed an entire facility in Southern California as a consequence to try to take care of the economies of scale. Just as a footnote, I'm sure you can imagine how interesting it is for us to work and educate our students when they are primarily Southern youth and come to the Northern California youth. And, you know, it's the South does meet the North, and we are successful in integrating them after about a 4-month socialization process. I won't tell you about how that socialization process works, but they are not always compliant.
I've got
yes.
Didn't we start off with like 6 or 7 different juvenile facilities?
4, 5, 6, at least 7, maybe 8.
And we could probably fit all of our population into 1 or 2. Just
our school size maxes out at about 300.
But the facilities themselves are designed for more, aren't they?
I can only speak about the education program.
Okay. Because I think that's part of the problem also. We, just for DJJ, outside of the education component of it, we've shrunk the population significantly. We've closed 1 facility.
Right.
Well, across time, we've actually closed several. We are now down to 5, and we are looking at 4, actively, because we do believe we need to save the state money, and we should operate in the most frugal way we can.
Somewhere along the line, we'll probably end up one in Northern California, one in Southern California. That would.
It would be a wonderful statement about the lack of crime if we could do that.
Yeah. I think it's more just the ability to physically house them in one area. You do get an economy of scale when you can cluster your resources.
Oh, sure. For example, we do have 2 schools at Stockton.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have someone new at the table.
Andrew Sharfer, Department of Finance. I was just going to be a resource if you need additional information about the facilities.
Okay.
You want to just talk about that for a little bit, our little thread we were going with?
We do agree that we'll probably get down to 4 facilities. I don't think we can do it in this fiscal year because we're going through the closure of Stark, which has already been mentioned, and that was a big closure. We just need to really look at the living unit space because under Farrell, our wards have to be divided in different living units. So it's not just so much that you can put them all in one facility, it's how much living unit space do you have. And so all of those considerations need to be taken into account. And can we shift our female population maybe to an outside contractor that would allow more wards into one facility? So there's a lot of factors, but we are looking at another closure, within the next couple of years, I would imagine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Does Farrell only apply to DJJ?
In my read of it, it does.
So, hypothetical, if you close DJJ altogether and took all those kids and moved them back to the county, then you could essentially circumvent Farrell. If it only applies to DJJ
Until
and
the
it
next
doesn't,
lawsuit.
Huh?
Right, until the next
lawsuit.
Until the next, that's what I'm saying. My fear is just that. If in fact it's the same kid, then eventually the county's going to get the same lawsuit. Because if it was that simple, you'd close DJJ and move them all to the county tomorrow.
Then the administration understands your concern. And that's something that we don't want to happen. We don't want Farrell to spread any further than it has. Our goal would be to do the best we can to really get out of Farrell. Do the programming that we're doing. The department's been pretty successful in making sure the living units are up, making sure that the kids are divided properly. So hopefully there would come a time when the court says, hey, you guys are doing a lot of the things that we asked, and let's get out of that first. Then let's talk about population shifts, which is not something that's being considered at this time, but under your scenario.
Okay.
How successful are you? I mean, you can only hold these students till 25?
Yes.
And then what happens?
Well, generally they've gone through their probation and they are hopefully, active members back in society. That would
Do
be
we
the
have
goal.
any records about?
Depending on their sentence, they go to the prison.
Yeah, well, yes.
They transfer to the big house.
Right.
If they're recharged of another crime. And honestly, I'm speaking for the Department of Finance, so I don't want to be an expert in that area.
Correct.
So we,
Approximately 25% of our youth are convicted in adult courts, given to us to take care of and educate with the expectation they'll become literate and have good job preparation skills. Those do get transferred to the adult side where they are merged with job training skills if they don't already have them. But that's our goal, and so that's in DJJ.
That's 25% of them.
Approximately 25%.
And the 75%?
75%, depending upon their sentencing. We keep them the average length that we have them is approximately 2.5 years. That's average. So, of course, there's some that are less time, some that are more time.
Right. Okay. Okay. Mr. Ricketts, you have a... Come forward. You're standing in... Department of Ed, do you have anything to... yes, add?
Heather Carlson with the Department of Education. I don't know that we have a specific proposal on the recommendations. We would like to point out that on page 10, we think that the categorical funds that are listed in the agenda seem a little high to us. We think that this number is probably inflated because there's some county office costs that don't necessarily are associated with the court schools. It could be things that are simply county office driven, like the Williams oversight funding could be included in that figure. So we would just point out that we think that number seems a little high to us. we appreciate the support of our April request for the reappropriation of the Title III funds. So, and then just any questions you have on court schools.
What level would you think is more realistic?
We don't have that data. We got this agenda, with only a little bit of time to kind of go over, so we could probably get something back to you with a little more of a range that we think is more appropriate, if you'd like.
And sorry, just to clarify really quickly, the estimate actually does back out everything that would be specific to sort of a county-level activity that isn't involved in the direct provision of education to students, like Williams, like just general oversight, financial oversight, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to Mr. Ricketts, the Department of Education, what role do you have in monitoring the success of our county schools and our DDJ?
We don't really have a lot of access to DJJ. They are kind of outside of our jurisdiction. We do have some special ed that we do some monitoring in. However, the court schools are part of some of our CPM, our categorical program monitoring, to the extent that they get categorical funds. Presumably, a lot of Title I for neglected and delinquent youth, of course, go, and to the extent that they receive those funds, they are part of our monitoring. Our county court schools are monitored for special ed purposes in the confines of the monitoring that's required for special ed. So there are some requirements specifically to court schools that the department is involved in.
Their budget?
The budget is actually just as LAO stated, that it's revenue limit driven. That money, those court schools are generally part of a county office of education, so that money that flows to them based on categorical or revenue limit funding would flow through the county office, and we do calculate county office entitlements.
Okay. Mr. Ricketts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Mike Ricketts with the County Superintendents of Schools Association, and would like to address some of the points that have been brought up and raised in the analysis, as well as the issue of funding for juvenile court schools. We've also have in the room our Los Angeles County Superintendent of Schools, Darlene Robles, who came up specifically to talk about this issue as it relates to Los Angeles County, but also the same issues that Los Angeles County faces in the operation of the juvenile court schools are the issues that all of our juvenile court schools are facing to one degree or another. So I think her testimony will help shed light on the specifics of Los Angeles County, but also on this issue as it's faced by all of our juvenile court schools. So I'd like to have the opportunity to bring her up with her staff. She has her program director here with her, as well as her chief financial officer to answer questions. So if we could take a moment, maybe invite her up.
Let's see if there's any other issues we want to talk about before the county comes up. Any other issue? Okay, all right. Good timing. Let's go.
And then I'd like to address some of the specifics after they've testified. Okay. I can do that, I think, afterwards. Right. It might be best to do it then. Thank you. And I think there is testimony as well as some charts that were prepared that the sergeant has to hand out. Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Senator Liu. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of county offices of education on the fiscal challenges we face in serving the state's most vulnerable and needy students. You have a copy of my prepared comments and also 2 graphs that I will refer to in my comments. Public agencies across California are grappling with the state's unprecedented budget shortfalls. County education offices are no exception. We have sustained reductions across all programs, but my focus today is on our juvenile court schools and how these programs have been affected by a systematic shift of the most serious young offenders from state to county programs. The good news is that we come here today with a no-cost solution that will partially fill the deep budget hole in which our juvenile court schools find themselves given our dated and inadequate funding system. I don't know if you know this, I found this out recently, but that the present funding structure for juvenile court schools began in 1978. And just some personal background, I taught at juvenile hall early in my career for about 6 months, so it was predates 1978, so I don't give my age away. But again, have some personal experience there. But when the authority to operate these programs was given to the county boards of education, that's when the funding structure changed. The funding structure was modeled on the formula used for county community day schools. It is an average daily attendance, or ADA formula, with an enhancement to support the smaller class size required for incarcerated youth. While this funding formula has remained the same for more than 30 years, the student population we serve has undergone a profound change. That is because since 1997, the state has systematically been reducing the population served in the Division of Juvenile Justice and placing these young people in county-run programs. Consider that in 1997, the California Youth Authority served a K-12 population of more than 8,000 youth. Today, that population has dropped to just a little below 1,400 students. It was 1,400 when I wrote this, but now it's gone down, I understand, that are now being served by DJJ. Unfortunately, this change does not reflect an overall decline in the number of serious youth offenders. What it means is that at least 6,500 young people who would have gone to a state facility are now being served by counties in local juvenile halls, ranches, and camps. Today, county juvenile court schools statewide serve 14,000 youth daily with a turnover rate of more than 470%. Understandably, then, the demographic, educational, and criminal profile of students in county juvenile court schools is identical to those who are being served by the state. Youth in county court schools are among the most serious offenders in the state and include those who will be tried as adults for multiple murders, sex crimes, and the most violent of offenses. For example, and you have that chart in front of you, it's a countdown on April 12th. You have 3 pie charts there. 1 day of youth detained at my county office showed that 427 were charged as adults with serious crimes under Welfare and Institution Code 707B. That translates to 32% of the total population of the 1,343 youth detained at the halls on that day. Of these, 242, or 57%, were charged with robbery or carjacking. 121, or 28%, were charged with assault or weapons-related crimes. 52, or 12%, were charged with homicide, and 12, or 3%, were charged with sex crimes. Now we add the youth detained in the Los Angeles juvenile probation camps on the same day, for a total of 738 minors charged as adults with serious crimes under, again, the Welfare Institution Code, 707B. That translates to 27% of the total population of 2,710 youth served by my agency's juvenile court schools on that one day. We also provided pie charts to show the significant number and percentage of the 707B offenders served in all the juvenile detention facilities. County court schools typically educate these students for 2, 3, or more years while their cases are being adjudicated. We have provided a graphic flow chart to illustrate this process and timeline. As was indicated earlier by the Senator, students they come to us, and we have students that I've known for 3 or 4 years at Barry J. Nido who are still awaiting their court hearing before they're going to be sent to state prison. So the time frames are very similar to what you heard earlier by the superintendent of the DJJ. Many of the youth who are tried as adults are educated in county juvenile hall schools until they turn 18, when they exit our program to serve out their sentence in county jail or state prison. The most serious offenders are never served by DJJ. They come to us. The gravity of these offenses is a significant cost driver for local programs. As was stated earlier on the Farrell lawsuit, the Farrell lawsuit may not be in our counties, but the ACLU is, Department of Justice is, and they have the same expectations of our operated programs as the Farrell lawsuit does on DJJ. Just like DJJ, county probation must segregate students for safety and security. For the school, that means decreasing class size and lower student-to-teacher ratios. Even within one classroom, youth must be segregated to keep them safe and our staff safe as well. We also, just like was mentioned earlier by the superintendent from DJJ, we also have a special camp that holds the most at-risk youth and most at risk of committing serious crimes. So we also have the same issues of segregating that population. Statewide, the student-to-teacher ratio in county juvenile court schools has fallen below the 15-to-1 for the reasons I just stated. These young people enter our juvenile court schools nearly broken, requiring a wide array of intensive and often costly educational intervention. To describe these students as at risk is an understatement. More accurately, they are in crisis. Almost one-third have disabilities, and of those, up to 30% qualify as emotionally disturbed, and another 60% have learning disabilities. Almost two-thirds are categorized as far below basic on state academic achievement tests. In Los Angeles County alone, 40% of our juvenile court school students are English learners and generally have an average fourth or lower grade reading level. We are committed to ensuring that county juvenile court schools meet the goals and expectations for quality educational services that the legislature, parents, and advocacy groups have set for us and that we have set for ourselves. The need is urgent, given that our schools may be the last chance to provide critical services during what could be a crossroads in these students' lives. Our teachers, administrators, and other school staff have dedicated themselves to serving these young people in perhaps the most difficult of learning environments, all the while striving to meet expectations with the current ADA funding we receive. Although we have exercised maximum effort in managing our funding, it falls far short of the level needed to adequately serve the numbers of incarcerated youth in our camps and halls, given the need for smaller class sizes and more intensive, costly educational interventions. Regular education programs have some ability to control costs by increasing class size, reducing instructional time, or days of operation. However, we don't have the flexibility of school districts to address budget shortfalls by taking measures such as these. We can increase class size or reduce instructional time to accommodate budget cuts. But as I said earlier, and as promised, we are here with a solution, one that comes at no cost to the state. Due to the decreasing student population in DJJ, we understand there is at least $6.5 million in excess funds that may be shifted to the Prop 98 General Fund. Unfortunately, $6.5 million will have a minimal benefit to regular schools. As a county previous superintendent, I may debate that, but I'm sure I'm not in that hat right now. But it could have a maximum benefit for juvenile court schools across the state. We are here before you today to ask that these over-appropriated funds be allocated to county offices for juvenile court schools statewide. We ask that these and other savings be combined to help resolve long-standing fiscal issues affecting the responsible operation of county juvenile court schools. Simply put, these funds were originally targeted to serve incarcerated youth in DJJ, and these funds should continue to serve these very same youth who are now in county programs. Once again, we are committed to providing incarcerated students with the full range of services and programs they need and deserve. But we have wrestled for at least a decade with an antiquated funding formula that fails to support the level of services we are required to provide to an increasingly demanding population of students. We urge you to consider our partial solution to these long-standing budget problems by ensuring that the excess DJJ dollars stay with the students who are the intended beneficiaries of these funds. The DJJ funds were targeted to serve incarcerated youth, and they should stay with our incarcerated youth as well. Today I have with me my Assistant Superintendent of Business Services, Ken Shelton, and my Assistant Superintendent of Educational Programs, Mr. Jerry Riley, who would also like to respond to some of the previous comments and also to clarify issues that pertain to county schools at LACO, but countywide as well. Excuse me, statewide as well.
Chairwoman, pleasure to be here. A couple of things I want to mention in response to the...
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I am Jerry Riley, the Assistant Superintendent at LACO for Educational Programs, and one of our programs are the juvenile court schools. There are a couple of things I'd like to clarify that were brought up by the Department of Finance folks, and one was on the class size. I'm sure the Senator saw me shaking my head when it was implied that we had control over our class sizes. In Title 24 regulations, which govern construction of juvenile detention facilities, it describes the classrooms and requirements that they have. They have a maximum in that regulation of 20 youth per classroom, period. And then they have particular size regulations, and it's 160 square feet for the teacher's desk and file cabinets or whatever, and then 28 square feet per student. So a normal classroom, which is 940, even though it could hold more youth, because typically in a high school you'd have 32 to 36 children packed into a standard-sized classroom. Nonetheless, we can only house a maximum of 20 because that is the Title 24 regulation that probation holds us to. But the other part of it in LA is that only 54% of the available classrooms that probation provides for us can actually hold that ratio of students. Now, we do have a negotiated class size of 17 to 1, but functionally statewide in 07-08, county court schools had a class size ratio of 15.05 to 1, while LA was operating at about 14.87. So we are, even though we have that 17 to 1 negotiated ratio, functionally we are just about at the state average for what other county programs, the county court schools are operating at. So I didn't know if there's any more questions on that class size issue, because then that gets back to the superintendent's comments on scalability, whereas with reductions of the last couple of years, county court school funding has gone down $2,000 per ADA. We have no way to rescale our program. We can't drop a sports program. We can't reduce increase class sizes or reduce an arts class or band class. We have to keep providing the same level of services no matter what the funding is, which is what is driving the deficit for the LA County Office of Education. We cannot reduce our services despite the funding being reduced relative to it. In the comments that were provided on the funding model, I did want to respond a little bit to them. It's on page 12, where they talked about the severity at county programs being less. And I know the superintendent has very thoroughly addressed that issue, but I would like to emphasize once again that our severity level has increased in our programs over the years. Those more serious students are now with us. They're with us for longer periods of time, and we're also holding the adult charged youth who will never enter DJJ. We're holding them in our facilities until they're transferred to state prison. Just below that, on the bed, on the next page, on the bed funding model, on page 13, there's a comment from the analysts that this would take away from the ADA model, which was a concern. And I need to tell the committee that this was a concern that was expressed very strongly by the program people who I represent throughout the state. We did not want to lose the ADA-driven model. We wanted that incentive to be there so that we had every child in class every day. What we were asking for is a bed enhancement, which would take into account the turnover rate of 470%, the special ed penetration rate of 30%, whereas in regular schools it's about 10%, the more severe special ed students, and then the extreme variations in our populations, where in LA County our population can vary 2 to 3 to 400 over a few month period of time. And we have to have the staffing for the maximum. We can't staff for the minimum. And then when the students show up, all of a sudden have teachers available, which leaves us with sometimes very small class sizes, and other times we have classes that are very full, but we have nothing to ever level that off, as opposed to being in a district where they can predict their September enrollment, they can predict their January enrollment, and they can predict their June enrollment and staff accordingly. We do not have that luxury. We do not know when the students are coming, and yet we have to have all the staff there, not only teachers, but counselors, school psychologists, special ed staff, administrators, etc.
What do you build for capacity? I mean, what is your capacity?
Well, we have to work with probation. This year, for example, we initially staffed for 3,200. And right now we're below 2,700. So we have 500 less now than what we have staffing, and we're overstaffed by 500. So next year we're going to staff for 2,500 because probation has said they're going to reduce. They don't have a number target for us, but we need to build the budget on some assumptions. So we're going to assume 2,500, and we'll let the year play out.
Okay.
Here's some follow-up.
Sure. Senator Huff.
So when you staff to 2,500 or so, do you take that population, the anticipated population, because it fluctuates, you said 2 to 3 to 400, whatever. So you do your anticipated maximum divide by 17 to come up with how many teachers then that you have for that?
Senator, we use 15 as a divisor because some of our classrooms were not able to hold more than that. For example, Challenger Camp,
And
which
that's
houses
the statewide
about
average you were talking about.
And that's the statewide average. The other thing is that we have segregation issues, too. For example, probation won't mix our girls in with our boys. They won't mix the pregnant girls in with the other girls. So sometimes we'll have one pregnant girl with the teacher. Or they'll get the murderer off the street who just, in a drive-by, shot a little kid. And they have to be educated, but they don't dare put that youth out into the general population until they find out where they can put them in. So we wind up with a youth with a teacher, a 1-to-1 on ratio, until we can get them in the general population. So we go for the 15 because operating, that's what it realistically looks like.
With 15, it gives you the flexibility for that one-on-one if necessary, or
yes.
However you have to.
And sometimes you just have to hire a sub to cover that youth.
Mr. Huff, if I may say, Senator, it gives you the flexibility. It doesn't give you the revenue.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, thank you.
I got that.
Okay, thank you. I understood, but I just wanted it for the record.
And when you have kids that are in lockup and not in the class, then that just gives you more flexibility as well?
Senator, what we try to do is that when kids are in what they call secure housing, they don't call it secure housing, special handling unit. I was used to Pelican Bay State Prison because I was from Del Norte County, so that's what it was known as. When those youth are in the SHU, we actually provide school services there. We go in and do school in there. So it's only when a youth actually refuses school or is ill or is taken to court or medical that we don't provide services. Otherwise, if they're in the SHU, especially if they're there more than one day, we go in and we teach.
What kind of percentage would fall into being sick, being out, refusing, whatever?
It's the main burden is in the juvenile halls. In the camps, we can run about 92 to 95% attendance rate. In the halls, we run about 78, 79%, which is a cost burden for us because the youth are frequently out for medical and for court reasons, and it is a very big cost driver for us.
And, of course, those youth don't generate ADA at that time. And since we're on a wholly ADA-funded system, then if they don't show up, even if we're staffed to provide the service, we're not going to get the funding for those youth.
They actually have to have rear ends in seats to be counted.
That's correct, Senator.
So if a ward is going to court, you lose the ADA for that day?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Pay you for letting us see.
And can I, Senator, can I add a couple of comments here? Just on the issue of of ADA, because I know your staff analysis noted that the enrollment or the number of wards that are in juvenile halls and camps, as well as at Division of Juvenile Justice Facilities, has declined over time, and it has declined slightly. We've been fairly stable, I think, but there might be some slight decline. I'm not sure why the estimate actually that's shown in here is so much lower for 2010-11, but that's something that we can look at. But let's just assume that it is declining. What's happening is that local probation departments, as well as the courts, are cognizant of the fact that they don't have the funding to provide the services on the custodial side for youth. And therefore, they're being more selective about who actually goes into juvenile halls. So we're getting a mix of higher-level offenders because the lower-level offenders, frankly, are being put out straight on probation, or they're being put on house arrest, which brings up a whole other educational issue that we won't address here. But they're actually so they're doing things to try and control their own capacity issues and their own ability to serve those youth. So while the population may appear to be fairly stable, because of the state policy to shift the more and more high-level offenders to the counties now, in terms of who we're serving a greater proportion of higher-level offenders. The second thing I would say is that we have both high-level offenders and we'll call them moderate-level offenders in our facilities, which in many ways oftentimes requires more segregation. So we have to have a broader range of educational offerings than you might have if you just had one class of offender that you had to deal with. The third thing I wanted to point out is that if you look at the Farrell lawsuit and the consent decree, and the requirements are very specific in terms of the educational program that's been deemed to be adequate for youth in the state facilities. And that was an agreement that it was put forward by the state. It was approved by the courts. So that's if you want to look at a model, that's a model. That was put into place before the policies to shift all of these youth to the counties were put into place. So the youth that we're serving now are the same youth that were in the juvenile justice facilities of the state at the time the Farrell decision and consent decree was put into place. So to say that somehow that model is not an appropriate model for services for these same youth in county facilities, I think gets directly to the issue that Senator Wright was raising, which is really an equity issue. So that's one issue. But to be honest, we know we are not going to get from the state anytime soon, certainly not this year, the level of funding that's being provided for the Farrell consent decree education plan that's in DJJ facilities. So the second issue, though, that we have is just a straight workload issue. For all the reasons that you've heard, we have costs that we can't control. Our costs are going up at the same time that our funding is being cut. And we do not begrudge the program or the funds that Department of Juvenile Justice gets for services to their youth. We're not saying that should be reduced or that should be less or you should take money away from them. The state has routinely over-appropriated funds, Prop 98 funds for those programs. And so we're saying that over-appropriation, which traditionally just goes back to the general fund or back to the Proposition 98 reversion account, that should follow these youth because we have increasing costs. I think we've demonstrated that fairly well. We have 14-to-1 class size ratios. We're funded probably for at best a 17-to-1 average right now. So we burned through our reserves in many counties and we just don't have the resources. So this is a straight workload adjustment for us. We just need additional funding to match the existing demands of the program in terms of the class size because it's really staffing costs that drive our costs, same as with the state. So that's my comments on that.
Thank you. Any others want to speak? No?
Senator, if I could just add
Sure.
two other things. I know that there was a lot of discussion about the categorical issues.
Right.
And one of the larger issues in there is the special ed because it contributes more than $2,000 per student, and it's listed as categorical. And I know the categorical language means it's restricted. But I need for the senators to know that of the $13.6 million deficit we had in our court schools last year that came out of our general operating fund to balance, $11.3 million was in special ed services. So of the $2,000 per student we used, which was about $6 million net, we had to add another $11.3 million for special ed services alone. Of the other categoricals, such as that are flex, like the IMF funds, we actually still continue to use those funds for textbooks. You know, those dollars were specifically given to court schools and other schools for purposes that we haven't lost the purpose for, that we can't not provide the textbooks for, you know, and that we have to keep acquiring it. Additionally, this argument is disturbing to us because we're talking about funding for core program. We're talking about revenue limit funding for core program. The extra dollars are added on to do extra things. They were supplemental. And now to imply that they should supplant is troubling to us because there's not that much of those dollars to go around, and they don't cover the deficit for which we do have because we do figure that in. All those dollars are swept in as best as we can, and yet we still had a $13.6 million operating deficit in our schools for last year. And lastly, on the revenue limit that was, or the revenue per student that was reported for DJJ, we had actually looked for 0809 at the SARCs for the 6 sites that were open. The lowest site was Joanna Boss at 20,000, and the highest funded site was at 62,000, which most of the other ones clustered around 30. So I am not quite sure about how we got down to 20 for DJJ, but we were figuring probably closer to 30,000 per student. Now, that's not a funding level we're asking for in court schools, but at least if we were at 17, we would probably be a lot closer, be able to fund our program without the level of encroachment which we have right now.
Senator Wright, you had a question?
Well, two. The $6 million, this would probably be for either finance or LAO.
Right.
They were making reference to. Where is that $6 million now?
6.5.
Gone. Six, huh? Oh.
6.5.
It's back in 98.
It's back in 98, right.
Oh. And I raised that because, Madam Chair, I think it would be perhaps something that we should look at in terms of money that had been previously allocated to this class of student. I think we should, the disparity between the 20,000 and the 30,000, we should be sure that we're at least counting apples and apples. It may be that one or the other is right and someone miscalculated, but at least we should be sure that we're operating under the same premise. Wherever that comes out is where it comes out. But
those are one-time overage too, isn't it? Are they one-time?
These are ongoing.
Is it ongoing reductions?
Right, the $6.7 million was actually money that was provided for one-time purposes to DJJ some years back and ended up inadvertently being kept in their budget, as I understand it. There's also other money that just comes from over-appropriation in terms of the amount they actually spend versus what's appropriated. So what we're asking for is just the amounts, because we know that the state is in difficult financial condition. We're not unaware of that. So we're just asking that for those amounts that were appropriated to DJJ for services, educational services, Proposition $98, that if those aren't used, that money then goes to the counties to serve those youth that now are being held at the county level. So it's simply a shift of funds that are already appropriated for that purpose. Otherwise, the money does just go back into the Proposition 98 pot. It may get used for other purposes than this, but we're saying that this should be a priority use of those funds.
Chair, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. Want to follow up, then Mr. Hunt?
The follow-up would be, Madam Chair, if we could, obviously we can't do it today, but if we could just determine where that revenue is and if it's something that we could flag for this purpose, and as well, if we can be assured that the comparisons that we're drawing are accurate. I don't pretend to know who's
correct.
Right or wrong at this point, but we should resolve those two things if we could.
Okay. Senator Huff?
What's your figure of per pupil that you get?
For DJJ?
No, for
county
the county.
schools.
We have it at our last in the handouts, and I don't have it right in front of me, Senator, but it's about 14.4 when we put all our funding together.
Thank you.
Okay, including categoricals and
yes.
special ed and all that
yes.
stuff. Okay, that's.
I just want to, if I may, Senator, clarify that sometimes I hear that we get a lot of categorical, and we don't. There's probably about a third of all the categoricals that we do get. And I do agree with Mr. Riley that to begin to look at it as a core would be supplanting. But it's a battle that court schools have had year in, year out for categorical. One example is when the governor several years ago added additional counseling funds for counselors at the high school level. It actually excluded court schools. So, it's a constant battle for categoricals to be given to our kids. And I see that as kind of discriminatory, given if I'm Darlene and I was at Montebello High School and I did something dumb and got arrested, I would think that those same dollars should still follow me even in another site. But that doesn't seem to be the sentiment here in Sacramento, and that's bothersome.
Okay, let's bring back Department of Ed and Finance, or LAO.
Yeah, I just want to ask them. How these savings are used to mitigate other just
as a clarification, this $6.5 million, what's happened to that monies?
Jennifer Kuhn from the Ledge Analyst. So if we're talking about the money in DJJ that has been materializing as savings, that's happening for DJJ specific reasons in terms of policy and population changes that are occurring within the agency. Now, this happens in several other kinds of programs. For example, special ed and EIA also have been budgeted such that ADA counts have been overestimated at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the year, savings is materializing, and that's available for you to be using for a variety of purposes, mostly to try to prevent new reductions in programs. So in this case, you wouldn't say, for example, that the EIA savings that we've identified of $67 million, that some other program is worthy of it just because we overestimated counts at the beginning of the year. So I think we would discourage you from just saying, well, there's money here, so let's shift it there. You need, we would argue, to be making these decisions within the context of your overall Proposition 98 budget, where you're going to be considering billions of dollars of cuts here within the next few days. What you're largely hearing about the difference between DJJ and the county court schools is dealing with staffing ratios. So Farrell is requiring DJJ to have about 12-to-1 in a typical classroom. LACO has testified that they've collectively bargained 17-to-1, and that they're actually operating at less than 15-to-1. Other than this, other than the core staffing ratio differences, you're not seeing large differences in the funding rates between county court schools and DJJ. It's being almost entirely explained away by these smaller classes, largely due to the lawsuit. Now, you might have an argument that you want court schools to be at 12-to-1, and you want that to happen statewide, and that's going to cost you a lot more than just dealing with LACO specifically. So just a few things to consider.
Thank you. Department of Finance?
Sure. Nicholas Schweitz with Finance. The savings that we've scored in DJJ have counted towards, the available amount of Proposition 98 funding in both the current year and the budget year. So if you were to try and shift that money or restore it, you'd either have to appropriate money in addition to what the administration has proposed for Proposition 98, or you would have to find reductions elsewhere to offset that.
Okay. Is there, for LACO's left, but, would special education,
Haven't left that far.
Special education equalization, would that help? Partially help, okay.
At this point, anything helps.
Okay. Ms. Kuhn, you.
My understanding, again, is that LACO has a special SELPA already, such that actually they're above the average for the going SELPA rate, such that equalization.
That's inaccurate.
Now you're getting head shakes.
They have their own court school SELPA, which is correct.
Okay.
They have other.
Heather Carlson, Department of Education. Under current law, the special education funding model has a statewide target rate. Under current statute, every SELPA, including the LACO SELPA, which is slightly unique in its funding formula, is above the statewide target. So in order to, quote, equalize, that statewide target would then have to be recalculated.
Okay. Okay, well, I think it leaves us with lots of things to think about. And we don't have to take any action today other than what we've already done. Oh, okay. Go ahead. Mr. Rickett.
I'm sorry, Senator, I didn't hear what the question was. I was out of the room for a moment.
Would special...
It wasn't a question. It was actually a statement.
Okay.
No, well, it was a question. Would special education equalization help LACO?
No.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Ricketts?
Yes, I know there are other members here that, or not members, but there are other folks here who would also like to, in public comment, just comment on this. So if you could get to,
okay. Just wanted to make sure that members got an opportunity to ask all the questions they need to ask about this particular county court school funding. And as far as I'm concerned, it's really a mess. So
well stated.
That we can't resolve here today. But it certainly needs to be looked into. So with that, if there's no other questions, let's just open it up for public comment. Thank you very much.
The rest of LACO that serves all the other special
Estelle Lemieux with the California Teachers Association, former educator for 17 years in the juvenile court schools here in Sacramento, and also representing the Education Coalition today because we support the request of shifting some of these dollars to the court schools. So we support this wholeheartedly. I can tell you, not only the Farrell lawsuit is an issue when you're a court school educator, but I can remember, you're locked up in a classroom as an educator with 15 students who, on a given day, maybe 3 or 4 of which are new students. So as an educator, you come in, you don't know what reading level these kids are functioning at, if they've gone to school at all. As mentioned previously, many of them are special education students because they've fallen through the cracks in your regular public schools. Many of them have not gone to school for many, many days. So as an educator, you have to pretty much individualize your instruction right on the spot, and you have to be able to make a quick assessment of that student to see what you can do to help them while they are with you for a short amount of time. Oftentimes, we had students who did not read above grade 3 level, and they're 15 and 16 years old. So that takes a lot of time, individual time. So class sizes are crucial if we want to help these very students to stay out of trouble and not return to the juvenile court school system. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Madam Chair and members, Kevin Gordon representing San Diego County Office of Education and the San Bernardino County Office of Education. There's been a lot of discussion amongst the county offices and the ones that we represent about some of the issues that LA has brought to light here today, and there is tremendous unanimity amongst those county offices, and our 2 county offices definitely agree with some of the things that were mentioned. One of the things that's unfortunate, given the budget dilemmas that we face, is that the issues that were articulated by LACO's county superintendent really deserve a good deal more work and investment, frankly, and a look at how do you remodel so that those are appropriately funded.
Correct.
So the request that they've made is incredibly modest by comparison to what really needs to be done. But we understand the budget situation is the way it is. So we really appreciate your careful consideration of that, I think, very, very modest request.
Thank you.
Barrett Snyder on behalf of the Santa Clara, Sonoma, and El Dorado County Offices of Education, associate myself with Mr. Gordon's comments. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comments?
Yeah, good job.
I just wanted to say thank you for allowing us to have this opportunity to speak with you today. I didn't get to say it before I walked out.
You've been a good advocate for your county schools, and we appreciate your taking the time out today to come forward to enlighten us about some of the issues that you are facing. So if there's no other public comment, I think Monday is the last day for open issues, subcommittee open issues, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we start the budget committee as a whole. And then after that, it's a conference committee and hopefully a budget in someone's near future. It's a very difficult, very, very difficult budget year. But you have brought a very important issue in front of us, and I would hope that we would have more time to look at some of the issues you've put before us, and hopefully we can come to some conclusion anyway, hopefully positive conclusion about how we deal with this most vulnerable population that we have here in California. So with that, no other comment. Look at that, Mr. Wright. You can go home. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Get back to the mic.